Adriana Sanchez, the Director of Communications here at National Marriage Week. National Marriage Week launches every February 7th through the 14th, and it's a fun time of events all across our nation. But it's also a movement that is growing all year long, when we're ministry leaders, churches, those in our government, and even us as couples are coming together to stand up and say we value our marriages. Our families and our country can flourish when the marriages within our homes are strong and healthy. So, we are so glad that you wanted to join us this evening and that you want to be intentional about growing individually and in your marriage. Each of our panelists is freely giving of their time to be here for you this evening to serve you in your marriage. Whether your marriage is struggling or in a really good spot, we are here to help arm you with the skills to make it even better. We are cheering you on. So let's get started.
Hello, viewers. I'm so happy you've joined our National Marriage Week panel discussion tonight. I'm Amy Morgan, your host this evening. Each of our distinguished guests tonight not only has decades of experience working with couples themselves, they've developed well-respected courses to train other professionals to do the same. They'll share the wisdom they've learned in their work helping couples cope with crisis and adversity, and I am just so delighted to introduce you to them. Dr. Bob Paul is the Vice President of the Focus on the Family Marriage Institute. He is a licensed professional counselor and a best-selling author. Dr. Paul is the primary architect of Focus's Hope Restored Marriage Intensive Counseling Program that has now served more than 14,000 couples from all over the world. Dr. Russ Berg is a divorce intervention specialist and trainer for 2 Restored Marriage Ministries. He's provided training for more than 500 pastors, counselors, therapists, and marriage mentors. He has been married to his high school sweetheart, Melody, for almost 50 years. Dr. Greg and Lisa Popcak are the founders of CatholicCounselors.com, authors of more than 20 books, and host More to Life, a call-in advice radio program on more than 400 stations affiliated with the EWTN radio network and on Sirius XM 130. They also serve on the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' National Advisory Board for Marriage and Family Ministry. We have an august group. Dr. Berg, Dr. Paul, Dr. Greg, and Lisa, thank you so much for being with us.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Every marriage will face adversity over the course of a lifetime. Finances rise and fall, children change a family dynamic, parents age, jobs change. Ideally, counselors and coaches can help a couple develop the resilience to weather the challenges before they blossom into a crisis. Dr. Berg, what's the difference between normal ups and downs of marriage and a true crisis?
The true crisis. Well, on the spectrum of I need a tune-up and I need a tourniquet, I work almost exclusively with the 25% of the couples that are 10 feet from the falls who are at risk of divorce. So my answers might be a little bit skewed, but one of the things I notice is that a couple of things. One, couples begin to have limited focus. They are unaware of the resources that actually served them well in the past, ways that they solved problems in the past. The power of God and the presence of God kind of get pushed to the side because when it's really a crisis, I think people lose track of the resources. I also think they begin to Gottman talks about the danger of having disdain for your spouse. When you get to the place where it's not really about the irritation of what's happened. It's the fact that I'm beginning down deep to really not like you. I'm beginning to value you less than you as a person that holds God's image, as a person who's the most important person to me. Something's happened to give me permission to devalue you. I think one other thing is that we confuse anger and fear. We begin to act out of fear. Fear is one of the most easily accessible emotions. Through yelling at it, when we find it's easier to express to our spouse anger about the situation, and sometimes psychologists will talk about the lid flip, so emotional flooding. And we can't get down to the truer emotion that, yes, I'm upset, but I'm really afraid. I'm afraid for us. I'm afraid for how this makes me feel. I'm afraid because a relationship feels fragile. I'm afraid of the kind of person that I'm turning into trying to deal with this, and I'm overwhelmed. So those are some of the things that kind of, there's certainly some of the things that Melody and I have gone through, but they're things that seem pretty common in the couples that we work with.
Oh, well, that's so helpful. Dr. Greg and Lisa, how would you define a crisis?
So, I mean, actually, Russ was sort of alluding to this. So, I don't think it has as much to do with the magnitude of the problem as it does with the mindset that we have going into the problem. Because you can have a crisis over a very small thing if it causes your lid to flip, as he was kind of talking about. So just to kind of unpack that a little bit, as we respond to something, if we allow our emotional temperature to start to increase, then our thinking brain starts to shut off and the reactive brain starts to turn back on. And at that point, I'm not responding to the problem anymore. I'm reacting to it. And when I'm reacting to a problem, I'm just sort of following old scripts that make me either want to push you away or push the problem away or cause me to hide out from the problem. And that's what causes the crisis. It's the reaction that then makes me kind of running around like the proverbial chicken with my head cut off and not turning toward each other or working together to address the issue. It's just I'm reacting to the issue in a defensive way.
Just as Dr. Berg was saying, most of that comes out of that fear response. We hit a situation, and whether it was small or very big and very much a surprise, we just fall into that place of fear. And instead of turning to God or turning to each other, and being vulnerable and humble enough to say, I'm terrified. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in this marriage. We've been married 35 years. I'm a fully grown human being. And suddenly I feel like I'm 3 years old and who's going to come and rescue me? We start to take it out on each other. We deal with that feeling of, as Dr. Berg was saying, really disliking the other person because somehow our brain is saying, it's their fault. If it's their fault, then I don't have to do anything about it.
Or it's your job to save me and you're not saving me.
It's this reaction of, I've got to find an evil villain in this. And we begin to, even under, the stream under the ground, the messages are, it's somehow if I'm mad at him or angry at him or disdain him, somehow something will happen to make me feel better and make this go away. And so we get very caught up in that. And when we first got married, a wonderful man that we know who had been married a very long time gave us one of the best pieces of advice I have ever heard, which is you can't both go crazy at the same time. And that's what turns it into a crisis. So if one of you can sort of stay in your adult, reasonable self, that self that can reach out to the other and to God, you'll make it through. So there have been many, many times where Greg and I will say, is it your turn or is it my turn? Who gets to grab it right now? Like, who's going to hold it together? And we'll kind of measure, like, who's at that
You have
point.
to manage it consciously like that sometimes. So that
Be honest about it. It lets you know you're both vulnerable, and it puts one of you at least in the problem-solving mindset. And honestly, when the other says, okay, it's your turn, then you get a little bit braver and you can make it through. But the crisis really comes when you're both going crazy at the same time and you don't turn toward each other or God.
What a great nugget of wisdom.
It was.
Dr. Paul, adversity can feel like a challenge that a couple might want to get past, but they don't know how. Crisis tends to add those doubts and questions. What symptoms do you see that couples might be in distress?
Yeah, I think what I see is that couples are at that point where they really need help when the situations that they're dealing with are seeming to them to be unmanageable. It's not just, I'm having a hard time. This is difficult. I don't like this, but I don't know how we get through this. This seems like something that could really do us in. And it is a perception. It may not be anything close to that when looked at with a more rational, clear perspective. But in that moment, it starts to feel as if I can't manage this. This is beyond, this is going to do us in. And now you're in a place of crisis and you really need to get some help so that you're just not stuck in that unless you just want to hang in there and hope it blows over.
Yeah. And you talked about like being teammates, but sometimes you can feel more like adversaries.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that one of the things that we find is that our enemy, who is very actively at work, wants to get us to see each other as adversaries. And the truth of the matter is, marriage by God's design is a team sport. And when you're on the same team, you either win together or you lose together. And at any time we square off as if we're actual enemies, it really is playing right into the enemy's hand. And I know who the real enemy is when Jenny and I get, my wife and I get at odds with each other. If I start seeing her as the enemy, as opposed to realize I'm being played, and then we square off, me against her, we're set up, and there really is no way to win, because if either one of us walks away feeling bad about the way that worked out, it's a loss for the team.
I love that. What about you, Dr. Berg? What symptoms have you seen that couples might be in distress?
I was thinking of two as we're talking. I need to take notes, tonight. Such great intersecting wisdom and insight. One of the things I think when couples, and most of us know that spouses aren't always on the same page as to whether or not they're in crisis. I think the most common presentation is what we call a mixed agenda couple. One thinks things are pretty good. The other goes, no, not quite so good. I think when a spouse is tempted to suggest permanent solutions for temporary problems, they're headed toward a crisis. When it doesn't dawn on them that I have a sinus infection, but I'm actually considering amputation. And that makes sense. The crazy makes sense to me. And I don't feel like I have any other options. Someone has said that divorce is almost always an attempt to solve a problem that people think can't be solved in any other way. And, to those of us that are trying to help them, it doesn't make sense. We want to try to help them see it. But when you're doing crazy, when you are backed in a corner and all you have is fear and the enemy has your number, permanent solutions to temporary problems make sense to you. And that's a real danger sign. I think one other thing is when we keep coming back to these vignettes where our emotional response is all out of proportion to what just happened. In other words, we're getting triggered over an event that's maybe a 1 or 2, but our emotional response is 8 or 9. And I think a crisis is when we start to draw emotional pain and emotional triggering from the past. And it's all out of proportion to what just happened, our conversation or the misfire, but it's not out of proportion to the unresolved pain and hurt that we still have that just hasn't been addressed. So a crisis is a double-edged thing. It is terrible to go through, but sometimes it's exactly what you and I need for God to surface. There is something unresolved that's going to keep on recycling in your marriage. And I want to give you another opportunity to look at it, as hard and as scary and as painful as it is.
Oh,
And you need help at that point because you don't have the perspective to do this yourself.
I love that. Dr. Greg and Lisa, you had talked about a little bit about that toddlers in a room, that reactive cycle. Could you unpack that for us?
You want to go?
Yeah, sure.
First?
Yeah. So when we talk about those two different brain states, and we do a lot of this sort of brain-based work in our pastoral counseling work, and in our book, How to Heal Your Marriage and Nurture Lasting Love, we talk about the solution-focused mindset versus the misery-making mindset, and it's basically when we're in our solution-focused mindset, our emotional brain and our thinking brain are both turned on. We're feeling what we're feeling, but our thinking brain is saying, so the emotional brain sends the signals up, right? Our thinking brain catches it and says, I got this. We can come up with a plan. We can gather some resources. We can figure out support. We can break this down into manageable pieces. Okay, we can do this, right? But as soon as we fall into that misery-making mindset, the thinking brain has gone offline now, and our emotional brain just takes over. And at that point, we can do one of 3 things. We can either pout and withdraw. Actually, 4 things. We can pout and withdraw. We can tantrum. or we lecture. We kind of run off at the mouth. You know how like in the wild, peacocks will spread their feathers, or cattle stick up its. They try to make themselves look bigger to intimidate the other person, or scare away the problem. Well, humans do that with words. Let me explain to you helpfully why you're wrong, and you should sit there and you're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah.
Or we might fawn. That's the last thing. Is like we just try to please the other. Just whatever you say, honey. I'll do whatever you want. It's fine.
Just appease the other.
And none of those things are actually solutions. They're reactions to the problem that either push the person away or try to get my way. But then it causes us to fall into a cycle where we just keep repeating those things over and over and over again. And when clients will say to us, I feel like I've done everything. I've done everything to try to solve this problem and nothing works. And so I'll say, well, tell me what you did. And they'll say, well, first I tried to let it go. So I was pouting, withdrawing, and then that didn't work. So then I got furious, and then we tantrumed about it, and then I tantrumed about it for a while, and then that didn't work. So then I tried to let it go again. So I pout and withdraw, and then I tried to tell him, we talked about this a million times. What's wrong with you? How can you? So now I've lectured, and so I've done all the things that don't work. And then I kind of cycle back through those things that don't work over and over and over again. And I convince myself that I've now done everything, so nothing will work. And the one thing I haven't done is allow myself to calm back down enough to be in my solution-focused mindset and think through the problem with my partner instead of reacting instead of reacting to my partner as if they're the problem.
Yeah. And that particularly comes into play when one of the partners has gone into that total shutdown because it works for them. Something about the marriage, even though it's making the other person miserable, is working for that partner. And so they're just going to stay in it. And then the other partner is just beating their head against the wall, going through this cycle, instead of saying, what can I do that will not put the marriage at, horrible risk, but will get this person out of this deplorable comfort zone where it's just working for them to sit around and never problem solve and never work on our marriage and never be there for me. And if we can, sometimes it's revealed in prayer. Sometimes it's good counsel where you just work with somebody who says, have you tried, moving it just this far over? So you kind of get them out of that like emotional, easy chair for a while. Things can begin to change. But if that one spouse is just too comfortable, all the other spouse's misery is working for them just fine. I don't know what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with our marriage. I'm perfectly happy. You're the problem. You're the crazy one. That's when we need that little shift, that help to be able to just kind of move that spouse a little in another direction.
That is so helpful. Threats that send couples into crisis can come from without and within the marriage. What are some catalysts you've seen, Dr. Paul?
The things that can cause people to be in trouble.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things, obviously. On the inside, one of the things that I think can really come back to bite people is that the issue that so many people in our culture have with being overly busy and inattentive. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how much a drift can occur just through inattentiveness. And so often, when people are raising their family, they're so focused on the busyness of life. They're focused on their children. And you kind of put your relationship many times on autopilot. And, that doesn't work any better in marriage than it would with a garden in your backyard. If you, throw seeds out in the backyard and hope that there'll be rain and, it'll grow and be productive, and you don't tend to it all, you're not going to have a very productive garden. The weeds will choke it out. Well, your relationship is going to be very much like that. If you don't invest in it, if you don't, pull out the weeds, if you don't tend to the soil, if you don't make sure it's plenty watered, you're not going to have a fruitful relationship. And what's so happens so often these days is the kids get to a point where they're finally, they fly the coop, and then you look at each other and you go, I don't even know who you are. And you see the gray divorce phenomenon occurring where people in their 50s and on are getting divorced, which was unheard of, several generations ago, but now it's very common. So that's one of the things. You just, the other thing can be that you get triggered. Your fears get triggered, as Dr. Berg said. Other things are going on, and you end up getting into a battle with one another. And you allow the circumstances from within and the circumstances without to cause you to see each other as enemies. And then circumstances themselves outside can be difficult, whether it be, situations in your economy or the global economy, crises that are going on in neighbors or in family members. various things that might be happening with your children as you're trying to raise them. There are so many different things that can come at you that, most of us don't have practice with dealing with those kind of crises. So when they come up, we really don't know what to do. We don't have the resources. We don't realize we have the resources. And those kind of things can set people into a position where they feel overwhelmed.
I know, Dr. Greg and Lisa, you talk about too, when couples, like a crisis like that happens, whether it be an internal or an external, but the crisis doesn't affect both of them the same way. And that can also become problematic, right?
Absolutely. And I think that the two things that I want everybody to understand is that what's going to get you through that is constantly talking through it and praying together. And even if you've never prayed together before, when you hit that kind of crisis, this is the time to start going to God and saying, we have no idea how to handle this. We don't have any idea how to see eye to eye on this. We have two different views on how we might want to handle it or what kind of stress this is causing us. Help us, walk us through this. Just help this work out, because we can't do it by ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that we've prayed something like, Lord, look, I know what I want to do, and she knows what she wants to do, but help us to figure out what you want us to do, and help us to take care of each other while we work to figure that out.
Exactly.
That prayer just makes all the difference in the world. It's, because it reorients us to the fact that, oh, wait a minute, we need to take care of each other while we figure out what God's asking us to do. And, there was a study, actually, Eli Finkel, psychologist at Northwestern, did a TED talk on what he called the marriage hack. And it was basically this idea that they encouraged couples to imagine, before they dealt with the problem, that they got advice from somebody who loved them both. And, as believers, we don't have to imagine that person, because we recognize that the God loves us both and he wants the best for both of us. So taking that time either before, during, or after an argument to say, okay, God, I have no idea how to handle this. I mean, I kind of know what I want to do. She knows what she wants to do, but help us to figure out what you want, and help us to take care of each other while we do it, enables that marriage hack to take place. And in the results of that study, they found that when people did that, not only were they more effective at solving the problems in the short term, in the long term, their marriage continued to improve, even after that exercise, just doing it once.
And I think the only thing I want to add to that is, you were saying before, during, or after, or all three. But really, even in the middle of a heated argument, if one of you has the presence of mind to be able to just stop and just off the cuff, nothing formal, nothing hyper religious, just saying, Lord, we're in the dark here. Just come into this, help us, and help us take care of each other, and help us see the way. The other thing is, when you're praying, help us take care of each other, don't be afraid to take short breaks in those conversations where you're trying to work things out and saying, you know what? I really want to hear what you're saying. I need a minute to kind of, breathe. I'm going to get myself a drink of water or a piece of pie. Do you want one? Is there anything I can do for you? Taking that moment to say, we're in this together. I want to take care of you while we get through this, because I believe in us, even though this is.
Yeah, even something as simple as, look, I just want you to know I love you.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging in there with me. I have no idea how to get through this, but thanks for doing this with me. I love you. And that just makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Dr. Berg, you had talked too about some of the crisis, we talked about the external and the internal unresolved loss. I know I lost my father this fall, and he was 90, but still, it's still a loss. And sometimes a relationship has taken a hit of an earthquake, like some sort of a death or something needs to be grieved. Let's talk a little about that, how to not let that drive a couple apart.
Yeah, when we work with couples, we use, and a lot of therapists and counselors use it. It's called a marriage map. We use a visual to try to let spouses diagram the journey of, and it's an abbreviated journey, but we go through, where are the 2 or 3 most important places where you started to see crisis that you couldn't along this timeline, and then husband and wife get to do it. Where are some places you got help? Where are some places your relationship was different, and so forth? What part of the goal of that, to do it visually, and I know it doesn't work for everyone, because some couples aren't visual, but when everyone is acquainted with what we call the horizontal narrative. This is what's happened to me in the relationship. but we're almost always, especially in a crisis, unaware of the vertical narrative. What was going on in the life of my spouse while I was going through this? So oftentimes it can uncover loss. We've had spouses where there was a there was a stillbirth that they had never talked about. And it was sort of the kind of thing where, the husband was working 50 hours a week, or the wife was going back to school, and it was in the midst of all of this busyness, that Bob pointed out. And we look at it finally in close proximity. Oh, that's when it happened. And God can open up an aha moment to go, I should have known, but I didn't. I should have known. And I knew you were struggling with this. I was trying to just make sure we could pay the mortgage, and they never talked about it. And that undiscussed, unresolved loss, and that loss could be a mortgage, it could be a financial reversal. It could be a child that comes home that has special needs. We're working with a couple of families that they're young families. They've got 4 kids, and 2 of them have special needs. And spouses don't cognitively understand what's being taken out of them, what's reducing their margin of love and of understanding that's going all understandably toward the kids. But they have time famine. They have emotional famine. They're just not equipped. I think one of the great things that people working with couples who are struggling can do is this co-created reality where they bring here's where we're looking at this mess. We don't think there's hope. But you and I not only bringing the hope from the gospel and the power of Christ to heal and to change our lives, but even by using things like by listening to a narrative, listening to a map, helping them unpack it a little bit. And then at the end, just a statement like, guys, your story is so much bigger than this. And we just started talking tonight. I just want you to know, I'm not sure what you'll take away from our conversation, but I don't see anything on this map that would lead me to believe that God doesn't have hope for you. And you're taking your part of so you're giving couples an opportunity to borrow hope from you, to borrow hope. And it makes perfect sense that they don't like each other. It makes perfect sense that they don't have hope. It makes perfect sense that God's provision has become on the periphery. It's become blurred to them. But they need someone who will stand with them and sit with them and sometimes hold their hand, pray them through. One person in their life that believes that having looked at this doesn't feel like they're hopeless. And I think a lot of times God uses us not to have the final solution, but to give them enough to hang on to till they can get professional help, till they can find a therapist that they connect with. Because couples oftentimes will say to me, when we're really honest with each other, we don't hate each other. We hate what our marriage has become. We hate the kind of people we've become trying to slog through with no answers. And to have one person that's not condemning, that will just listen to them and love them, and say, guys, I don't know what you're going to take away from this. I just want you to know I don't see anything here that would lead me to believe that you guys are beyond hope.
Amy, one of the things that makes me think about, I think a lot of people don't recognize that even though you wouldn't wish it on anybody, those types of challenges, those types of crises oftentimes can be the thing that can draw you into some of the deepest levels of intimate connection that anything can do. My wife and I have gone through some challenges, and why this is so important that you show up for one another and be present with your heart under those circumstances is that you are demonstrating something very, very powerful to one another. If you've got a friend that you know you can count on to be there when times are good, but at the slightest sign of challenge, they hightail it and run. We've got a name for that kind of friend. We call him a fair weather friend. The reason we call him a fair weather friend is that there is no security in that relationship. But when you've got someone that you know you can count on to be fully present emotionally with you in difficult times, now that's someone you can count on, and it like blows the roof off the relationship and opens the possibility for victories and celebrations at a whole different level. So one of the situations that Jenny and I went through, we had some challenges in our relationship. We broke through. We were doing really, really well. And then we had one of our grandchildren born. Our granddaughter was born with some pretty significant challenges, and our children very bravely went against the doctors and decided they wanted to let her live. They said, we know she's here for a reason. We don't know what it is, but we want to find out. They gave her a relatively short life expectancy, 5 months to 3 years. Well, there were times when what they were going through with her handicap was so overwhelming that Jenny and I would just lay in bed together in fear, in uncertainty. We would hold each other and we would pray, not having any idea where this was heading. And I can't begin to tell you, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but the bonding that occurred from us knowing we could count on each other to be by each other's side in the face of difficulty like that was powerful. And then finally, she passed away, and it was on Valentine's Day, 12 years ago. And I'll tell you, Valentine's Day will never be the same for me. It is not that happy romantic day that's coming up this week. It is, it's Remember Rocher Day. And I am always reflecting on the impact that little girl had on our life and how powerfully bonded we were. Now we have other things that are coming up, and we have a current situation that's extremely challenging, and we are coming together. And as the Popcak said, we are praying through this in the face of tremendous challenge and tremendous uncertainty. And it is very bonding. It didn't take us out like this. It took us like this, and we are facing it together. In good times, in bad times, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, with God right in the middle of it.
Wow.
Oh, Dr.
And I
Paul,
think,
thank you.
looking at that, what's really important for couples to remember why they need to fight for that is that the research shows us that couples that don't have that, the divorce rate among parents with terminally ill children is higher than the because they get through the grief, but no one's taught them how to grieve together, and then they split. And so what you're describing is really the antithesis. It's really what the enemy hates about those opportunities to bind us together when we're in the depths of trouble. But if we don't do it, it's not. I don't find it's neutral. We either get bonded together or we get broken apart. Oftentimes.
I just want to throw it, Ray, if you don't mind me, I want to just emphasize something else that was kind of a subtext here. It's sort of the power of the mundane moments. That a lot of times when we're upset with each other, we just sort of isolate, right? So we don't show up for the family meal because I'll just grab something on the way home from work, or game night. I don't want to play game night. I don't want to be around you. Talk to you. Like we throw away all the rituals of working and playing and talking and praying together. We just get rid of those things and isolate because we're hurting. But what that does is it throws the whole relationship into question. We have an argument, and I jettison those rituals. Now all of a sudden the whole relationship is in question, as opposed to if we're struggling with each other, but we show up for the meal anyway. And maybe it's not the most pleasant meal, but we're there, right? And we show up for the game night, and we don't really enjoy it, but we do it, and
keeping your commitment.
We're saying to each other, I'm committed to being here and working this out with you. We might not like each other very much. We might be disagreeing with each other, but we're showing up for each other. And if you keep showing up for each other, odds are you're going to be able to figure it out. It's the couples who throw those rituals away and just isolate that can never get the time together to figure it out, because you have to then, if you're so busy isolating, you have to schedule time to talk about the problem.
And nobody wants that. Is the problem,
right? Yeah. And but if you keep doing the things, the little mundane things, you have a little conversation, and you go away, and you come back, you have a little bit more of the conversation, and you work at it bit by bit.
And I will just add to that. And if you're not in crisis, if things are going well, start building those routines into your life.
Yes.
Make sure you're having meals together. Make sure you're taking a walk and talking, or having some time to talk. Make sure that there are times when you're just laying in bed together, holding each other, talking about the day, so that when you crawl in the moments of crisis, it doesn't feel weird. You're connecting with the person you've always found that peace and that connection with. Play games together, have fun together, develop those routines together, so that when things get difficult, you can rely on that to remind you of who the two of you are together.
I love how you just gave a beautiful description. You used the phrase before that taking care of each other, even in the conflict or the crisis, and how you start there. And could you tell us a little bit more about taking care of each other? Because that's kind of one of the hallmarks of your best practices.
Yeah, well, everybody kind of says, communication is key, and there's something to that, but even more foundationally is this idea of caretaking, especially in conflict, because you can follow all the rules of good communication, but if you're not taking care of each other, you'll still find ways to be defensive around each other. So little ways that because I've even taught people couples like communications exercise, right? Use an I feel statement. Well, I feel like you're a jerk, right? If there's not that sense of we're looking for little ways to take care of each other and encourage each other through the conflict, we'll use whatever we have to beat each other to death with, including communication rules. And so little things, just like we were saying before, stopping in the middle of the argument and saying, look, this is awful, but I just want you to know that I love you, and I thank you for hanging in there with me. Yeah. Or I'm really my throat is dry. I'm going to go grab a quick drink. Can I get you something? Just those little bids that say I'm trying to do something, however pathetic it seems, to take care of you through this, really helps to
build trust.
Build
trust and to do those things when you're not in conflict, so it doesn't seem like you're just kissing up kind of a thing. You need to do that. We start every single morning before our feet hit the floor, where we take time, we pray for each other. This isn't a big long thing. It's like 3 minutes, 4 minutes on a rougher day when there's more to list to God. But it's those things that we're just asking God to bless each other, taking that moment before we hit the floor. But then when we're done, we say, okay, what do you need from me today? What can I do to make your day a little bit easier, a little bit more pleasant? And sometimes it's just, hey, just pray for me. Or, can you make sure you get, my allergy medication from the store? Or, I really could use, 20 minutes just away from the kids tonight. Can you cover for me and let me go to the bathroom by myself, please? Those little things, but you're asking. And in that conflict, you're also asking, how can I show you I love you right now? So many of us are running around trying to figure out, what our style of how we feel loved or how our spouse feels loved. Like we're decoding something in the middle of a war. Just ask. What do you need from me today? Or in the crisis, what do you need from me right now to feel supported?
And the research really shows that how much you do those little things to take care of each other predicts how well you'll be able to weather conflict. Because when you're doing those little caretaking gestures, it lets you give each other the benefit of the doubt. You're able to say, I know that 9 times out of 10 you're trying to look out for my best interests. On that 10th time where I'm not so sure where you're coming from, I'm going to let it go for now.
Let it go for now. Or you can literally, I know there are times we've both done this, where you're literally sitting there thinking, my spouse is this is it. They're just terrible. I've read this wrong for the last 400 years of our marriage. They really are a horrible human being. But then the Holy Spirit comes in and goes, oh, wait a minute. Like 90% of the time, they're a pretty decent person.
They're taking care of me. They're looking out for me.
They're doing the things. And then the truth comes that they're not a terrible person. This is just a terrible moment or a terrible crisis or a terrible struggle. But the evidence is there.
But it's really important to have that evidence. So that's why I say that the caretaking is really the most important thing that you can do in conflict or out of conflict to increase the likelihood of getting through conflict.
But I'm going to say it one more time, and especially as you, Bob, brought up the fact that Valentine's Day is coming up and we're doing this whole thing because of that. Don't guess. One of the, there are a lot of calls over our 20 years on the air that we remember, but there's one that I will never forget. Or a gentleman, you know what I'm talking about. This gentleman called in. He'd been married decades. And he asked us what he should get his wife for her birthday. Oh. And we were like, we don't know your wife. How are we supposed to? Have you asked her?
Yeah.
And there's just this idea of, I think it was put in our heads back where everybody was watching sitcoms and you'd hear this, resounding, if you loved me, you'd just know. That's a big lie from Satan. No, you don't. When you say your vows, you don't become a mind reader for your spouse. And knowing is not the test. If you need something, tell your spouse. If you don't know what your spouse needs, ask your spouse on a daily basis, and it'll work out a lot easier for both of you.
I love that. In fact, speaking of Valentine's Day, I did just ask my husband today. I said, you know what my favorite treat is? That the one I'm expecting you to bring home on Friday. And he made a joke, but yes, he did know. So I was glad. Dr. Berg, you have some beautiful language that you gave us a little taste of it earlier, and I think I had some tears welling up, but about how to express that care to your spouse, even if you're in a conflict. Could you share a little bit about kind of how maybe when you're working with a couple, some of those phrases that you use, because man, they're just beautiful.
Yeah, let me I just find too, and this just could be me. Some people have said you're kind of an acquired taste when it comes to counseling, because I just had a couple fire me 3 weeks ago. Sweet couple. They both had, God really rescued them from addictions, and they were just so sweet. Sent me, because I've had some health things, so I've had to cancel and move stuff, and they just wanted to take the pressure off. Hey, we're doing fine. We're going to cancel all the appointments that we've got going forward, but we'd like to take you out to dinner. Part of what I needed, what helped this couple, was just giving them language that was in here, but it wasn't here. And so just things like the difference for them, a huge thing was learning the difference between unpacking the confusion around forgiveness. That rather than using the phrase "I'm sorry," which in our culture gets convoluted to be asked, like, I owe you an apology. Okay, so I screwed up. I'm sorry. I gave you an apology. Why are you still upset at me? Yeah, I gave you what, because we're not understanding that there's a huge difference between asking to be excused as a human being and asking to be forgiven because we were wrong. So even teaching couples not to use initially, we do it so quickly, but teaching a spouse, before you use the phrase "I'm sorry," maybe the phrase "I was wrong. I know that this hurt you. And if I don't understand how much it's hurt you, I'm listening. I need you to tell me. Will you forgive me? How can I make this right?" Which is totally different than what we culture. I said I was sorry. Why are you still pissed at me 3 weeks later? Why are we still talking about this? I think the other thing is giving couples permission to exercise their right to remain silent. And rather than trying to think of the right word, to use very profound words when they're trying to hear their spouse's heart. Very profound phrases that, like, "Oh, I didn't know." For me and our relationship with Melody and me, I get excited when I'm mad, and when I'm excited, my voice goes up and my words get faster. I have to do two things if I want to communicate to Mel. I have to slow down my word output, and I have to lower my voice, because she already has a filter. After 50 years of being married, she has a filter. She knows how to protect herself against the barrage of Russ stuff. But if I can even physically too, just move a little bit closer to her and use words that are slower and softer, something in her goes, "He's trying to listen. Maybe it's safe for me, to open up." And that safety, I think the language is real important, because when we make stuff up, we're so inundated with garbage on the internet of, you pull up your browser. Here are 5 different articles of, here are the 10 secrets to marriage. Here's the 3 things that now I'm free of because I'm not, because I'm divorced. If we could get couples to just, and some of this is rooted in study of scripture, but Colossians 3 makes a distinction between forbearance and forgiveness. Forbearance is putting up with stuff that's not going to change. It's not. The stuff in the early church, they had different, they spoke different languages, they had different foods, they had different customs. And Paul says there's going to be stuff in the church. As brothers and sisters, as husbands, you're just going to need to cover it with love and be okay with it, and stop making it a federal offense. Stop being perpetually offended because it's different. Just accept it. Then there are other things that need to be forgiven because they involve a breaking of a violation of trust or of love, and that's a spiritual issue. And giving couples the language to know the difference, and then helping let them try it out in a session, because they go home and they're stumbling with it, or worse yet, they get they leave the church and they're sitting in the cab of their truck and they're going, crap, what? I don't remember what he said. What? I give them a sheet. Use these words. Okay, these are Russ words. Try these out. Tell me if they don't work. Find your own. But when they find, and Greg and Lisa pointed this, when they find words that land on their spouse's heart, may not work for anyone else, but they land on their spouse's heart, and there's something inside that causes them to go, I'm not afraid. I think this person loves me. You need to use those words again and again and again, habitually, the same words, because they connect with your spouse's heart.
Oh, I love that, Dr. Berg. And I love, too, that you said you give them a sheet, because when neither spouse has that resources to be able to get out of their crisis, it's a good time to turn to someone who does. And Dr. Pollack, you do that same thing, right? Is to get circumstances that try to help people with those resources. Could you share a little bit about what you do? And thank you also, by the way, for being so transparent with us and sharing your own personal story. That's very kind.
I think one of the keys about really being people of faith is that when we're really going through difficult times, the hero of the story is always God. And we're just all journeyers trying to sort out, how to get through a bunch of very difficult circumstances living in this fallen world. And God has absolutely been the hero of our story. And I see it with so many people that we work with. We have people that are coming through our program that are in dire straits. And it's interesting, when I'm thinking about the words that they can use to speak to each other's heart. It's funny, as I've been doing this for so many years now, I've noticed that when people are sitting in session, there are 3 words that probably more capture the heart of what's going on behind their struggle that are maybe the least said 3 words I can think of. But I see it over and over again, even when they're angry, when they're different, when they're shut down, when they're whatever. When you really get to the core, it's these 3 words: I miss you. And, you see people who are struggling and they've gotten to a point where they haven't known how to connect, and they've been missing each other, and maybe they're discouraged. Maybe they're they've turned off or turned away. But at the core, the issue has been that I've missed you. I cared about you. And that's why I married you. I don't know how to reconnect with you. It's amazing how powerfully people connect with that when they're offered those 3 words. Is that really what's going on for you? Well, yeah, that has been what's going on for me. And how often have you said that? Never. Yeah. And it's amazing how much that can make a very big, impactful moment for both of them when they see that with each other. And they've been terrified that they weren't going to be able to figure out how to reconnect. And fear has been so powerfully going on. The other thing, we do a lot of group work in our program. We work with couples individually, but we do a lot of work in group counseling settings. And a lot of people are afraid to be in that group setting before they get there. And we found that it is, for most people, the most powerful way of working that we found. And the reason has been, when you get past all the stuff on the surface that makes everybody look so different and their circumstances so different, when you get down to the core, there's really only a handful of issues that all of us are dealing with, and they're really virtually the same. And to be in a situation where you're looking across the room at somebody who's dealing with issues that look on the surface completely different from you, and you realize that they're dealing with more or less the same fears, the same hurts, the same issues as me, all of a sudden we realize, I'm just not that weird. My struggles aren't that out of the ordinary. And you can find hope, because it doesn't feel as unmanageable anymore when you realize what you're dealing with isn't that you're that weird, or your spouse is that weird, or they're that big a problem. It's that we're dealing with normal human issues. And the enemy really does want us to believe that it's beyond hope, it's beyond help, that we are hopeless, and there is no hope for us. And that is right where he wants us to live. And I think the Popcak said that is not the truth. And it's really important that we recognize that none of this is beyond God. And that's why we see miracles occur in our work all the time. The primary thing that we do in session is help people to identify the obstacles that more often than not, inadvertently, they've placed between themselves and the Lord. Once they see the obstacles they place between themselves and the Lord, if they want help moving it out of the way, we move it out of the way. Because if God has an open, unhindered heart that is giving him access, he will not hesitate to show up. And when he does, things dramatically change and people move forward toward health and wholeness. And it's really great to see, because none of us are miracle workers, but we serve a God who is.
And what a great, just an emphasis and a reminder that when a couple is stuck, that they need some help. And all of y'all have decades of pointing people to that help. If somebody's resistant or they're thinking about divorce, does thinking about divorce mean it's inevitable? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in first.
Absolutely not. If I think about smacking somebody across the face because they irritate me, that doesn't mean I'm going to smack them across the face. It means that something is disturbing me. There's that, Star Wars, like there's a disturbance in the force, and I have to figure out what it is and how to fix it. And if you move into a solution-focused mindset yourself, preferably with your partner, with the help you can get, no, nothing's inevitable just because you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I go into every session expecting to find resistance. I think that people get scared. And a lot of times people come to a helper, and what they're expecting, they put the problem out there and they're expecting us, when we hit resistance, to try and push through. And I absolutely refuse to do that, because I'm there to help them get where they want to get to. And I'm not going to try and push through. I'm going to honor and respect them. And but I expect it. And when I hit resistance, I just stop and I won't go forward. We talk about what they want to talk about. We don't talk about what they don't want to talk about, no matter how much I might think it'd be in their best interest to talk about it. It's their deal. And they're expecting me to try and push through. And when I don't, it catches them by surprise. And they realize that I'm saying, okay, we can stop right here. I'm fine with that. And then they pause and they go, well, you can't leave me here. This is a terrible place. And then they lay it down. And then I'll say, okay, well, let's go. And we talk a little bit more. But then I expect the resistance to happen again quickly, because we're going to hit another pocket of fear. And I'll do the same thing. And they go, well, no, I'm not there yet. This is still a terrible place. And then they lay it down. And I just do that over and over again. And it's amazing how quickly we can get to the core when I don't push through the resistance. And it really does work that way in a marriage too. I am very big on honoring walls. And if my wife puts a wall up, I will honor it. And even if it, it might mean that for that moment, I'm not able to get with her in the kind of interaction or the kind of intimate connection I would like. When I push through, I've realized that the wall is there because she's afraid of me. And when I'm trying to either break through the door, scale the wall, parachute behind it, tunnel under it, whatever, all I did was prove to her that I actually was scary and that there was a good reason to be there. And when instead I honored it and said, I'm more concerned about the person behind the wall that's afraid than I am in getting what I want in this moment. And it created an environment that was dramatically safer. And it was a massive shift in our relationship.
Oh, what a beautiful illustration. Dr. Berg, I know you have spent a great portion of your career doing a special kind of counseling to help people that are thinking about divorce. Can you unpack that for us a little bit? Because it's so specialized and so different than just couple counseling.
It's a triage. We did. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Bill Doherty at the University of Minnesota and a group of pastors here at the Twin Cities, and my doctoral work was actually around the first divorce intervention training for clergy. And one of the things that we found is, the narrative about what's called divorce ambivalence, or how the divorce decision's made. So to answer the question before, a lot of people think about divorce just because of our culture. We call divorce a social contagion. Almost everyone, I know there's exceptions, but almost every couple that I work with that is thinking or wrestling with divorce knows someone that's getting divorced or has been divorced. And oftentimes the narrative is, hey, it's horrible, but don't cut the dog's tail off a little bit at a time. I survived it. Your kids will be fine. We preach about resilience. And so the culture's telling you it's okay to think about it. I mean, you see it thrown in your face in your browser. The thing that I think is important for us that work with couples is to remember that the divorce decision is not the picture that was painted 15, 20 years ago, where the divorce decision it's a long decision that spouses have thought about it. It's not changeable. The divorce decision, according to a lot of the most recent research, is very fluid. You wake up one day and go, I can't live with you anymore. You wake up the other day and look at your kids and go, I can't do this. And the issue is who's speaking into your life while this decision is malleable. And to be able to help people understand, just because the thought comes in, you can get help. If you let it sit there, now your negative narrative begins to collect permissions. It is a very specific thinking that it's called the walk-away wife syndrome. Very specific thinking that goes on, that if nobody intersects you, nobody with hope, nobody with and I just love what Bob said about honoring boundaries. Sometimes people want those walls up, not because they're afraid, but they want them up to see if they can trust you. It's a test for you. And once you pass that test, they will lay the wall down and they'll tell you things that they have not. And I think with the divorce ideation, it's really important to have people in the Christ follower community and the counseling community, because this isn't a very common part. I've done LMFT trainings in universities where it's not part of the curriculum to do divorce intervention. But to help couples understand that just because you started to use the word and the concepts doesn't mean you're headed for divorce, but you need help. The more comfortable you become with the thought that you could, and in our state, this is really hard. In Minnesota, we're a no fault, no waiting period state. You can finalize a divorce in our biggest county 90 days from filing to finality. And the question is, who's in your life that's helping you slow this down? And discernment counseling, which is what came out of it, faith-based discernment counseling, helps a couple answer this one question. Before you make an irrevocable decision with so much at stake, are you absolutely sure divorce is your best and your only option? And as Christ followers, we know what God believes about this, but a couple that is struggling with divorce ideation and divorce ambivalence, they need to own that. They need to be given the space where they have to own what this decision will mean. And they have to realize, in my mind, in my crisis, I think divorce is the only thing that will help. But they have to have other options. You have to help them. You have to reintroduce the fact that God is for them and that He has already mapped out a path for their healing if they will humble themselves and turn to Him. He's already standing ready to help them, even if I, as the counselor, have no idea what the next step is.
Oh, I just love that. And Dr. Berg, too, as you said so beautifully earlier, that you help them borrow hope from you. Could you share that, the way you say that, just quickly, because I think that's such a hopeful way to end our time together. Just how you encourage couples that maybe or really think that divorce might be the only option, or they don't see another way out of that crisis, that they can
It
borrow
could,
hope from you.
sure. It could be. I sort of wait because I don't want it to be manipulative. I have to, and Bob said this so well, you have to go at the pace that the Lord and the Holy Spirit is unraveling, is opening up a path forward. You can't, this is, counseling is all about, it's all about pacing. It's all about, God, do I move forward? Do I pull back? And sometimes it's not that a couple's decided on divorce. Sometimes they are just so broken and so hurt and so discouraged. This has gone on for years. It may be their second marriage. It may be a blended family. They have all kinds of layers of things that are overwhelming to them. And they're just sitting in front of you. You can tell by their countenance that they are weighed down with hopelessness. And sometimes I don't always do this right, but I try to ask the Spirit of God if I can just speak into that and say, guys, and I always give them, especially for the person who doesn't want to be there. It's usually a spouse that the skid marks from their car all the way to the front door. They got dragged there. I always make them a hero. And I said, as we close tonight, I want you to know, I just have a tremendous amount of appreciation for the courage that it took for you to come to a meeting you didn't want to have. And I know that we've stirred up a lot of stuff and it may seem hopeless. And I'm not really sure where your thinking is on who God is and how much he's involved in our lives. I want you to know that as you've shared things, I'm a Christ follower, and I want you to know that I'm willing to let you borrow hope from me, because I haven't heard anything tonight that would lead. This is your marriage. I don't get to weigh in on your marriage. This is between you and yourself and the Lord. But I just want you to know another person sat here for 90 minutes and listened. I want you to know that I think if you would like to borrow hope from me, I'll walk with you. And then usually that borrowing hope needs to be coupled with an action step. It's easy to say you're going to borrow hope from someone, but then they're almost always waiting for, okay, who are you going to refer me to? And I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm a pastoral, I'm a crisis marriage counselor. So oftentimes I'll say, guys, I don't know where the best help is for you. But if you're willing to walk with me, I will do the very best job I can bringing God's resources into our conversations and help you find where can we get the help that God wants for your marriage and God wants for your relationship. And I want to assure you there is good resources out there. And I have every confidence that if you guys just open your heart to the Lord, regardless of how long the process or how painful it might be, I think it's a realistic thing for you guys to borrow hope from me. Because when I look at you and I think about the family and the picture that you painted, my hope for you is that you don't add the pain of regret to the pain of divorce.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much. What a hopeful and beautiful way to end our time here. Oh, Dr. Berg, Dr. Paul, Dr. Greg, and Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you.
Oh, you've all shared such great information. What would our marriages look like if we asked our spouses each day how we can take care of them? Ask, right? And what are the little things we can do to build that friendship that will stand us in good stead the next time life sends adversity our way? Oh, viewers, thank you so much for joining us for National Marriage Week. Stay tuned. We're back every night this week through Valentine's Day. If you'd like to continue to join us, make sure you sign up for each individual discussion. Find answers to your questions and register at marriageweek.org.